I heard the lock click. And that's when I realized my own daughter had done it. It was a sound so soft, so ordinary, that at first I thought I had imagined it, but the cold silence that followed told me the truth. I reached for the doorknob, twisted it gently, and when it didn't budge, my heart dropped, locked from the outside. And then I heard her voice, muffled but unmistakable, telling someone on the phone, "She'll be fine. She just needs rest." No, that wasn't rest. That wasn't protection, that wasn't care, that was control. I stood still for a moment, staring at the wooden door that had become a barrier between me and my own freedom. It was a door I had opened countless times in my life, a passage that once symbolized the warmth of family, the laughter of grandchildren running through the halls, and the soft voice of my daughter calling, "Mom, come eat with us." But now, that door was closed, and so was everything it once represented. People assume that old age makes you invisible, that wrinkles erase your wisdom, that gray hair makes your voice softer, easier to ignore. But I have lived, I have survived. I've carried babies on my back, worked double shifts, buried the love of my life, and rebuilt myself from the ashes. I didn't reach this age by being weak, but when your own child treats you like you're a problem to be solved, it hits differently. At first, I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she locked the door by accident. Maybe there was some reason, a repair, a child's prank, anything but what my instincts whispered. But the days that followed shattered those illusions. Meals slid under the door. Lights turned off without asking. No knock, no conversation. Just silence. Controlled, curated silence. I thought I was losing my mind. But then I looked in the mirror and whispered to myself, "This isn't confusion. This is betrayal." You see, love doesn't look like imprisonment. Family doesn't sound like locked doors. Respect isn't measured by how quiet they can keep you. I realized that if I stayed silent, they'd write the story for me. They'd call it concern. They'd name it protection. But deep down, I knew, if I didn't stand up, I'd disappear right there, in that room. That's when everything changed. Because something inside me, something fierce, something ancient, refused to be erased. And I wasn't alone. There was someone watching, someone listening, someone who remembered who I used to be. My grandson. My light. But I'll get to that part soon. Because before the rescue, there was the storm. Before the justice, there was the pain. And before I found the strength to fight back, I had to face a truth that no mother ever wants to admit. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They saw me as a burden. If this story resonates with something deep in you, if you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, stay with me. This isn't just a tale of betrayal. It's a reminder that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes it's a prison, and breaking free takes more than courage. It takes truth. If this is the kind of story that moves you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories that will open your eyes and touch your heart. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like your voice was taken away by the very people who were supposed to protect it? What did you do to reclaim it? My name is Evelyn. I am 73 years old, a retired literature professor, and once upon a time, I was a woman everyone turned to for answers. I stood tall in lecture halls filled with eager minds, traveled the world giving talks, and wrote essays that challenged and inspired generations. My life was marked by independence, clarity, and a deep sense of purpose. I raised my daughter, Julia, alone after losing my husband to cancer when she was only 8. I gave her everything: time, support, education, comfort. I made sure she lacked nothing, even if it meant I went without, and yet somehow, here I am, standing in a house that doesn't feel like home, in a life that doesn't feel like mine. It all started with a fall, a stupid, clumsy moment in the kitchen. One second I was reaching for a plate on the top shelf. The next I was on the floor, stunned but not seriously hurt. I had a bruised hip and a scraped elbow, nothing more. But to Julia, that moment was a full-blown crisis. She showed up the next day, frantic, almost overbearing, and insisted that I couldn't live alone anymore. "What if next time you can't get up?" she said, placing her hand over mine with an intensity that felt more like pressure than love. I tried to argue. I told her I was fine, that I'd install more safety rails, that I'd wear one of those medical alert buttons, that I had neighbors and friends checking in on me. But she was relentless. "You're all I have, Mom," she kept saying. "Let me take care of you." The guilt worked. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I missed hearing another voice in the house. Maybe I was just lonely. So I packed a suitcase and moved into Julia's house. At first it felt temporary. I kept telling myself I'd be back home in a week or two, once she realized I didn't need full-time care. But the weeks turned into months. And the tone of the house shifted subtly at first. Julia was busy, always working or running errands, leaving me alone for hours. Her husband, Mark, barely spoke to me unless it was forced politeness. And her children, my grandchildren, seemed to avoid me entirely. The energy was cold, cautious, like I was some foreign object they didn't know how to handle. I noticed things disappearing: my mail, my favorite shawl, the herbal teas I always kept in my purse. The guest room I slept in started to feel like a cage. There were no locks on the inside of the door. Julia began scheduling my doctor appointments without asking me. She changed my prescriptions. She even replaced my reading glasses with ones she claimed were better suited for me. It was subtle control, packaged as kindness, manipulation with a smile. When I asked about getting my things from my home, she waved it off. "We'll bring it later, Mom. You don't need all that stuff now." But that was my stuff. My books, my photographs, my life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her when she had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a responsibility. I never raised her to pity me. I never taught her to silence people she loved. One night, as I sat in the living room after everyone had gone to bed, I realized the TV remote didn't work anymore. Julia had replaced it with a universal remote with limited controls. Then I noticed that my phone charger was gone. My reading lamp was unplugged. I started connecting the dots, little limitations, day by day, as if she were reducing my world to a single, silent room. It's hard to explain how betrayal feels when it comes from your own child. It's not a stab. It's a slow erosion, a gentle pull of the rug under your feet until you're too dizzy to stand. I began writing everything down in a notebook I kept hidden behind the dresser. Names, dates, words, every slight, every shift in tone. I wasn't paranoid. I was documenting. I knew what truth looked like, and I was going to hold on to it. One morning, I overheard Julia on the phone, whispering in the kitchen. I only caught part of it, but it chilled me. She doesn't even realize what's happening. At that moment, I realized this wasn't care. This was control wrapped in guilt and wrapped again in manipulation. And I wasn't going to let it break me. I had lost too much already: my husband, my independence, my voice. But I still had my mind. I still had my will. And somewhere deep down, I still believed that the truth would rise, even if I had to fight for it. If you've ever felt erased in a house you helped build, if you've ever felt invisible to people you once cradled in your arms, then you'll understand what I mean when I say this. Being treated like a burden doesn't just hurt, it robs you of your identity. But I'm not done yet. If this story already touched you in some way, hit that like button and subscribe now, because what comes next will leave you speechless. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the very people you raised? Your words might just inspire someone else to reclaim their voice too. The first sign wasn't the missing credit card. It was the silence, that uncomfortable hush that fell over the room every time I entered, like I had become background noise in my own life. My name is Clarice, and I am 74 years old. I used to be a woman people listened to, respected, even admired, a retired educator who built a life out of words and knowledge. Now, all I could hear was the sound of conversations dying the moment I walked in. I began to realize that something was shifting, but I stayed quiet, because part of me still believed in my daughter. At first, it was subtle. My wallet seemed thinner. I brushed it off, thinking I must have misplaced something. Then came the phone swap. My smartphone where I kept my photos, my reminders, my numbers was gone one morning, replaced by a simple device with no internet access, no camera, nothing but a dial pad. "It's easier for you, Mom," Jessica said with a smile. "You don't need all that stuff." She said it was for my safety. Everything was for my safety now. Suddenly, my doctor's appointments were rescheduled without my knowledge. I wasn't even allowed to speak directly with the clinic. "Don't worry, I'll handle it," Jessica insisted. When the nurse called once to confirm my checkup, I overheard my daughter tell her, "Just call me next time." My mom gets confused easily. Confused. Me, That word clung to my skin like a cold sweat. I hadn't felt confused. I hadn't asked for help, but they were labeling me now, not as their mother or grandmother, but as a problem to be managed. The mail started arriving already opened. My old friends stopped calling, and I wondered if Jessica had told them I was sick or worse, mentally gone. I tried to make a phone call once, but my new phone didn't have their numbers. When I asked about it, she laughed. "You barely called them before, Mom. It's just clutter." They were erasing me, bit by bit, detail by detail. One afternoon, I tried to plan a small get-together for my birthday. Nothing big, just a few friends, some cake, old music. When I mentioned it at the table, my daughter's face turned to stone. "You shouldn't overwhelm yourself," she said. "Besides, it's not like you remember all their names now, do you?" "I remember every single name." I went to my room that night with my chest tight and my fingers trembling. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small, lined notebook. It was the same one I used to use in my classroom years ago. That night, I wrote my first entry. "They think I'm forgetting, but I remember everything." And I did. I started writing every night. What they said, what they did, when they opened my door without knocking, when they talked about me like I wasn't there, when they laughed at how I looked trying to walk after resting too long on the couch. I wrote about the nurse who looked at me with pity, about how the lights in my room now turned off from outside the hallway, about the bathroom door that suddenly had a lock on the outside. Then came the cameras. I saw them one morning, two small lenses tucked in the corner of the living room. Jessica said it was for security, but I knew better. I was being watched, controlled, reduced to a fragile thing to be monitored. I wasn't fragile. I was furious. They underestimated the strength that comes from being overlooked. They forgot who I was, that I once stood in front of classrooms, guided futures, read laws, signed checks, buried a husband, and raised a daughter who now saw me as a burden, to be locked away and handled. One evening, as I wrote another passage in my notebook, I saw something that shifted everything. My granddaughter Emma was standing at the door, watching me write. But instead of running off to tell Jessica, she walked in and whispered, "Grandma, are you okay?" I paused, looked her in the eyes, and something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from awakening, because someone had noticed. And when someone notices, everything can change. Now I want to know from you, have you ever felt like your voice was taken from you, like you were being erased silently? Leave a comment below and tell us, because your story, your truth, might be the spark that helps someone else find their strength too. There was a moment sharp and unforgettable when I heard the lock click from the other side. Not the soft creak of an old door or the hesitant jiggle of a nervous hand, but the solid, metallic click of certainty. I turned slowly, gripping the edge of the dresser for balance, and realized the truth. In that instant, I was no longer free in my own daughter's home. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I had become a prisoner. It had started earlier that day. A disagreement, nothing more. I had asked to see my own medical records, curious about a recent appointment I didn't remember scheduling. Jessica, my daughter, had laughed nervously and waved it off. "It's nothing, Mom. Just routine. You don't need to worry yourself." But I insisted, "Jessica, I'm not dead. I have a right to know what's being said about my body." That's when her expression changed. It was subtle, but the warmth drained from her eyes. She left the room without another word. A few hours later, I tried to leave for a walk, and the door wouldn't open. I tried the windows, locked. My phone had already been taken days ago, for security, she had claimed. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now I understood. Every little action had led to this. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I knocked gently on the door. No answer. I called out, "Jessica, is everything all right?" Nothing. Minutes turned into hours. Then, a tray of food appeared at the door. No knock, no voice, just the soft clink of porcelain and footsteps fading away. I didn't eat that night. The next morning, the same ritual repeated. The food arrived. No conversation, no acknowledgement, just silence. I listened from behind the door, straining to hear life on the other side. I heard the television. I heard laughter. I heard my daughter's voice, bright and sweet, when she spoke on the phone with someone. "She's not in her right mind anyway," Jessica whispered. A pause. Then, the sentence that pierced me like a knife. "The less she does, the better. This way, I can finally breathe." I sat down slowly, feeling my knees tremble beneath me. Was that how she saw me? As a burden, a problem to be locked away so she could breathe. I had raised that girl with my bare hands. I had worked 2 jobs, paid for her schooling, stayed up through her fevers, her heartbreaks, her first failed job. I was the one who kissed her forehead when she cried. And now, she fed me like a stray cat and locked the door. But even caged birds remember how to sing. I started writing. Each day, I would scribble down every detail: what time the food arrived, what I overheard through the door, how many hours I went without seeing another human face. I documented my physical pain, the swelling in my ankles, the headaches from lack of fresh air. I wrote about the dreams that kept haunting me of running down a hill, free, with the sun on my back and the wind on my cheeks. I tore pieces of paper from the notebook and hid them under a loose floorboard. Every day, one more page. My story, tucked away, waiting, and I began to watch. Through the slits in the blinds, I observed when the delivery man came. I noted when the trash was taken out. I learned the rhythm of the house like a soldier trapped behind enemy lines. I was gathering data, strategizing, planning, because if they thought I was too old to think, they had underestimated me deeply. I started leaving subtle sign scratches on the door, displaced furniture, the tray nudged a few inches further than before. I wanted Jessica to see I was aware, that I wasn't fading, that I remembered everything. One night, I stood in the dark and whispered to the silence, "You will not bury me while I'm still breathing." That night, I didn't sleep. Planned, I imagined. I remembered who I was, because I was not born to be anyone's prisoner. And maybe, just maybe, someone outside that door still saw me as I really was. Now I ask, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Left behind by those you raised? What would you have done in my place? Let's talk about it in the comments. Of course, here's the topic. Enclausuramento, 10 o'clock to 20 o'clock, written with exactly 7,000 characters, in a flowing emotional tone, faithful to the structure you're following. It was a morning like any other, or so it seemed. The birds outside still chirped, the sunlight still filtered through the window, but something in the air felt wrong. Evelyn, sitting at the edge of her bed, had just finished scribbling a line in her hidden journal when she noticed the shift. Her daughter, Jessica, usually loud with her footsteps, moved quietly through the hall that day. There was no greeting, no knock, only the unmistakable sound of the key turning in the lock. From the outside, a metallic click that echoed like a verdict. She stood up slowly, the pen slipping from her hand. Approaching the door, she wrapped her fingers around the knob and turned it tonally to confirm her fear. It wouldn't budge. She tapped once, then again. "Jessica," she called out, trying to keep her voice calm. No answer. The hallway was silent. Confused, she sat back down, thinking it might have been a mistake, but time passed. No breakfast came, no check-in, just silence. Hours later, a tray was slipped through the bottom edge of the door. On it, toast, dry eggs, and a lukewarm cup of tea. No love, no warmth, just fuel. She felt her chest tighten. Something inside her crumbled. A part of her that had held on to hope that maybe this was just a rough patch in their relationship started to bleed. Evelyn had raised her daughter with such pride. As a teacher, she had taught hundreds of children with compassion, patience, and love. But her own daughter was now treating her like an inconvenience. Later that day, she heard Jessica on the phone, her voice muffled but cutting. "She's not in her right mind anyway. This is for the best. It's temporary." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, not from fear, but from betrayal. She remembered changing Jessica's diapers, staying up during her fevers, attending every school event with a bouquet of flowers, and now, she was being locked away like a forgotten antique. Night fell. The room turned cold. There were no blankets added to the bed. Her phone was gone. Her books, too. The television had been removed days ago under the excuse of avoiding distractions. Evelyn lay down and stared at the ceiling, her mind running in circles. But within that ache, a spark formed. Not rage strategy. She started to observe the pattern of Jessica's footsteps, the times the tray arrived, the exact moment she heard the door unlock briefly, just enough to leave something behind. She noted them all in the margins of her diary, now hidden inside the lining of an old pillow. Days passed, each one longer than the last. But Evelyn, though bruised in spirit, was sharpening her mind. She counted seconds, memorized the creaks in the floorboards, and even practiced her posture in front of the mirror each morning, refusing to let herself shrink. One afternoon, she caught a new phrase from Jessica, whispered but powerful. "Once the house is in my name, we'll figure out the rest." That was it. That was the truth. The care, the concern had never been real. She wasn't being protected. She was being removed. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She stayed up scribbling names of old friends, former colleagues, neighbors. She recited emergency numbers over and over, etching them into her mind. She whispered prayers not of fear, but of preparation. She even began to use small objects to practice unlocking things: hairpins, paper clips. The room might have been sealed, but her spirit was not. She practiced movements in the dark, feeling around the walls, preparing herself for the moment she'd need to act. She started writing letters carefully folded and hidden under the loose floorboard. Letters to people who once respected her, loved her. Letters she hoped would one day be found. In each one, she signed her full name and added one line: "If you're reading this, it means I still have a voice." Evelyn refused to disappear. She would not be erased quietly. She knew that survival wasn't just about breathing, it was about remembering who you are, even when the world wants to forget. And now, I ask you, have you ever seen someone treated like they didn't matter and stayed silent? What if the next person forgotten was someone you love? She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even knock on the door anymore. After all, what was the point? Silence had become her armor, her weapon, her prayer. Every hour locked inside that dim room added another thread to the plan she was quietly stitching together in her mind. Etta, once a proud, sharp-minded educator, now sat on the edge of a small bed with nothing but four walls and her thoughts to keep her company. But even in confinement, she was never powerless. She just needed time. Each morning, she marked a tiny line behind the curtain rod with a fork she had kept hidden beneath her pillow. 1 day, 2, 3, the days were becoming heavier, but she kept counting. She noticed patterns. When her meals arrived, when the footsteps echoed near the hallway, when the lights flickered outside her window. She knew her daughter's rhythm better than she knew her own breath now, and that rhythm had cracks. On the 6th day, as sunlight crept through the blinds, she spotted something behind the lower shelf of the old wooden closet. It was a dusty radio, the kind her husband once tinkered with on Sunday afternoons. It had no batteries, no charger, but it had potential. Her fingers trembled as she examined it, not because she was afraid, but because hope, after so many nights of despair, was a dangerous and beautiful thing. She scavenged through the drawers and corners of the room, collecting whatever she could: paper clips, a broken comb, even foil from the food trays. She remembered lessons from decades ago, things her students built for science fairs. She remembered being underestimated before. She remembered winning anyway. It took hours, but she made it hum. The sound was weak, but it was sound. Then, she remembered something even more valuable than the radio: her voice, her words, her truth. She waited for the house to grow silent again, for the moment when the tension settled just long enough for her to act. She took the tiny voice recorder from the side of the radio and hid it beneath the nightstand. The next morning, when her daughter came in to mumble sarcastic remarks while sliding a cold plate of oatmeal onto the floor, she pressed record from under the blanket. "She's not in her right mind. I'm doing the world a favor keeping her in here." Her daughter laughed into the air, unaware that every syllable was now becoming evidence. Etta didn't stop at one recording. She collected many: her daughter's flippant cruelty, the muffled phone calls full of lies, even the careless comments about inheritance. "She's basically done living. She should be grateful I let her stay at all," she had said once, not knowing her mother's spirit was far from broken. On the 10th day, Etta wrote a letter, not a goodbye, not a plea, but a call for help. She chose her words carefully, kept it short, clear, undeniable. "My name is Etta Collins. I am being held against my will by my daughter, Jessica. I am not confused. I am not ill. Please help me." She folded it 3 times, tucked it into an envelope she fashioned out of napkins and tape, and waited for the wind. That afternoon, she heard laughter children playing near the street. Her fingers pushed open the lowest part of the window pane just enough to slip the letter through. It fluttered to the ground, landing near the feet of a small boy chasing a toy truck. He stared at it, puzzled. His mother called his name. He picked up the note and ran to her. She read the message, her face changing from amusement to alarm within seconds. Etta didn't know it yet, but the gears were already turning. That mother made a call. That call reached a local officer, and that officer didn't wait. Within hours, wheels were rolling. Help was coming. Now Etta stood in front of her mirror, rehearsing what she would say. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She was ready. Every bruise to her pride, every ignored whisper, every stolen date had prepared her for this. Her story would not end in silence. And now I want to hear from you. What would you do if someone tried to erase your voice, your autonomy, your identity piece by piece? Drop a comment below and tell me what you would fight for if the world tried to take it from you. When the knock finally came at the door, it wasn't soft, it was sharp, official, like truth demanding to be let in. From the small slit between the old curtain and the window frame, I saw them uniforms, flashlights, and the steady, calm presence of the police. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or if salvation had finally arrived. The lock clicked. This time, it wasn't locking me in, it was unlocking my nightmare. 2 officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. One of them paused when he saw me. I must have looked like a ghost of myself, sunken cheeks, unwashed hair, the same sweater I'd worn for days. But when our eyes met, something shifted. He saw me, truly saw me. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, gently. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with emotion. I simply held out the notebook. My diary. Every word I had scribbled in secret. Every cry I couldn't let out loud. Behind it, I handed over the small recorder I'd hidden inside an old tea tin. I didn't need to explain, but the proof was there. Voices filled the hallway behind them. Jessica, my daughter, and her husband, Samuel. "This is a mistake," she barked. "She's not well. She needs rest and supervision." But the officer didn't flinch. "We've received credible evidence of elder abuse," he stated. "We'll be escorting your mother out while we investigate." "I did everything for her," Jessica shouted, her voice rising, cracking under the weight of lies. "She's confused. She doesn't know what's real anymore." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of days spent locked in, of meals pushed through a door like I was an animal, and I looked straight at her. "I may be old, Jessica," I said calmly, "but I am not confused. I am not crazy. I know what you did, and now, so does the world." Behind me, a soft voice spoke up. My neighbor's son, Daniel, barely 16, stood nervously at the edge of the hallway. "I gave them the letter she wrote," he said, looking at me with eyes full of quiet loyalty. I knew something was wrong. Nobody believed me, but I believed her. That moment didn't just crack the walls of that house, shattered them. The silence I had been buried under broke wide open. The police led me outside, wrapped me in a soft blanket. The sunlight hit my face like a blessing. Fresh air, real voices, and the unmistakable feeling of being free. Neighbors gathered. Some looked shocked. Some avoided my gaze. But Daniel walked beside me, holding my hand like a grandson would. And I realized sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's those who see you when everyone else looks away. As the ambulance checked my vitals, I could hear Jessica yelling behind closed doors. Still clinging to her story, still trying to make herself the victim. But her words no longer had power. The truth was louder, stronger. That night, at the shelter where they took me for recovery, I slept in a clean bed for the first time in weeks. No locks, no cold trays of food, just peace, just silence that didn't scream. And as I wrote the final words in my diary that night, I smiled, because I had survived, I had spoken, and someone had listened. Injustice has many disguises. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you once rocked to sleep. But justice walks in when you least expect it, and reminds you that your voice still matters. Have you ever seen someone rise from the ashes of silence? Someone underestimated, overlooked, but who still found the strength to stand? Tell me in the comments, because the world needs stories like yours. Stories of strength, stories of rebirth. Evelyn stepped out of the black car with cautious grace, her feet touching the gravel path of her new home. A soft breeze danced around her, carrying the scent of jasmine and pine from the surrounding trees. This was no longer her prison, it was a sanctuary. The small cottage, nestled at the edge of a peaceful village, didn't echo with control or judgment. It welcomed her with silence, space, and the kind of stillness that heals. Here, No one looked at her with suspicion or impatience. She was simply Evelyn again. Not a burden, not a shadow. A woman with a name, a story, and now freedom. She walked slowly around the house, touching the ivy that curled around the porch, running her fingers along the wooden railings that had been worn by time but still stood strong, like her. Inside, the walls were painted in warm tones, with a cozy reading nook and a kitchen that filled with light every morning. Her room overlooked a small garden already in bloom, as if nature itself had been waiting for her to arrive. She didn't waste time settling into stillness. Within a week, Evelyn had joined a local community group that met weekly to talk about aging, dignity, and resilience. Not out of complaint, but out of purpose. She began to speak first in quiet reflections over tea, and soon in front of rooms filled with people who hung on her every word. Her story, once a secret carved into a diary and hidden under a floorboard, now rippled through others like a call to awareness. She wasn't telling her tale for pity. She was planting seeds of strength. Word spread, and local organizations invited her to speak at events, seminars, and even schools. Evelyn stood at podiums not as a victim, but as a survivor. Her voice, once muffled behind a locked door, now commanded rooms. She spoke with elegance, wisdom, and that spark in her eye that no one could dim. She told them what it meant to be silenced, and more importantly, how to rise. She wasn't alone in this new chapter. Her grandson, the one whose heart had stayed open when others turned away, visited her every weekend. He brought her books, brewed her favorite coffee just the way she liked it, and listened to her stories, both old and new. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the trees sway. Sometimes they argued over history, or laughed about silly TV shows, but always, they connected. Evelyn picked up old hobbies she'd nearly forgotten: watercolors, baking, writing letters by hand. She found a box of postcards she had once collected during her travels and began mailing them against two friends she hadn't spoken to in decades. Two people who once inspired her. Two women who had once told her she was the strongest person they knew. Slowly, they replied. One by one, they returned to her life like stars blinking back into the night sky. The village embraced her. Children waved as she walked by. Neighbors dropped off fresh bread or flowers from their gardens. She was known not just as the woman who escaped, but as the heart of something greater. Reminder that dignity doesn't expire with age. On quiet mornings, she sat in her garden with a journal in her lap. Not one hidden out of fear, but open, proud, resting beside her coffee. Her words were no longer confined to desperation. They danced with gratitude, resolve, and joy. She wrote about reclaiming time, about second chances, about identity beyond motherhood, beyond age, beyond expectation. One golden afternoon, her grandson arrived with a bag of tulip bulbs. Together, they kneeled in the soil, laughing about who was better at digging straight lines. As they planted, Evelyn looked at the horizon where the sun dipped slowly, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. She took his hand in hers, eyes misty, and said softly, "They tried to silence me, but I remembered who I was. Now I turn to you." Have you ever watched someone be underestimated, dismissed, or erased and wished you had stepped in? What if this is your moment to be someone's turning point? If Evelyn's story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Tap the like button to let others know this message matters. Subscribe so you never miss the next story of courage and transformation. Because in the next video, you'll meet someone who didn't just survive injustice, they turned it into a legacy. And you won't want to miss what happens next. There are moments in life when silence becomes a scream, when being ignored hurts more than being struck, and when the absence of love echoes louder than any spoken word. Evelyn knew those moments well. She had lived them behind locked doors, in a room meant to protect but used to isolate. She had tasted the bitter flavor of betrayal, wearing the mask of concern. But she had also witnessed something divine, a seed of strength buried so deep within her that not even neglect, manipulation, or confinement could kill it. Her journey was not one of fairy tales. There were no magical rescues, no instant justice. What there was, instead, was a slow, deliberate rising, a remembrance of who she had always been, a woman of dignity, of intelligence, of profound strength. Someone who once molded young minds in classrooms and who had survived grief, loss, and loneliness with unwavering faith. Evelyn's resurrection wasn't from physical captivity alone. It was a spiritual awakening. Once free, she didn't choose to vanish into comfort. She chose visibility. She chose purpose. She stood before rooms filled with strangers, sharing her story not to gain sympathy, but to light a fire in the hearts of those too afraid to speak. Her words didn't tremble, they commanded attention. She told of pain, yes, but more importantly, she told of resilience, of how the human spirit, when anchored in hope and lifted by truth, becomes unbreakable. In the quiet of the early mornings, she would sip tea by her window, feeling the sunlight not as something distant but as a warm embrace. She wrote letters again, but now they were filled with gratitude, encouragement, and power. She reconnected with people she had once thought lost to time, those who remembered the woman she had been and now marveled at the woman she had become. Faith carried her through the darkest nights. She clung to the promise that she was not forgotten, not forsaken, that God had seen her tears when no one else did, that He had placed strength in her soul for such a time as this. And when she looked into the eyes of the children in her lectures, or held the hands of elderly women whispering their own stories of hurt, she knew that her survival had a purpose far beyond herself. Evelyn didn't need revenge to heal. She needed truth. She needed love. She needed a space to bloom again. And once she found it, she became a garden open, welcoming, and unafraid to grow in the light of her scars. Every wrinkle on her face became a mark of survival. Every step she took was a victory song. Because real healing doesn't scream. It speaks gently, steadily, and with conviction. And it doesn't hide. It walks into the world and says, "This is who I am. This is what I overcame." Evelyn now lives proof that no one is ever too old to rise again, to be seen, to be valued. Her story is not just hers, it belongs to every person who has ever been made to feel invisible. If her voice could reach you now, it would say this: "They tried to silence me, but I remembered who I was, and now I will never let anyone forget." If you felt something watching this video, take a moment to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps stories like Evelyn's reach more hearts, and if you're ready to hear another powerful journey of courage and truth, don't miss our next video. It just might be the one that changes the way you see everything.